What is up guys, welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and today I'm going to be looking at Cooler Master's MB530P with a power supply shield, 3 tempered glass panels, addressable RGB and aggressive intakes, all for $110. Is it worth your cash, and does it perform as well in the real world as it does on paper?
Are you ready for us? 'Cause I'm ready for you. Are you ready for us? We can be something new. Are you ready?
When powered down, this case is a fairly unassuming, slightly premium looking, if a bit boring, of a chassis with a fairly pleasing symmetry. Turn it on though, power it up, and it becomes a totally different beast. Thankfully you retain the solid feature set and pleasing symmetry, but the whole chassis just looks 10 times more aggressive and 10 times more expensive, helping to line up with Cooler Master's showroom ready marketing materials. Moving on to the chassis itself, and the theme of generic ATX mid-tower continues, with room for 4 2.5-inch SSDs, 2 3.5-inch hard drives, and motherboards of mini ITX, micro ATX and ATX sizes. The front I/O is another case of nicely done, but isn't groundbreaking. It's not going to be winning any awards anytime soon, with 2 USB 2 ports, 2 USB 3 ports, an addressable RGB power button, and a reset switch that's been repurposed as an RGB controller. More on that later. You also get HD audio, so your headphone and microphone jacks, so it really covers all the necessary bases. I would have perhaps liked to have seen USB 3.1 here, the 10 gigabit throughput standard, though I understand for this case's price point that is a feature we can't be too moany and groany about. Fan and radiator mounting support is really quite impressive in this chassis. With room for a 360 or 280mm unit in the front, I'd recommend sticking to radiators with multiples of 120 to keep those fans, which I'll come onto in a moment's time. Room for a 120mm unit in the back, and also a 240mm radiator in the top, though clearance may be just a little bit limited. Cooler Master are actually kind enough to include 3 120mm addressable RGB units in the front. And now I really like Cooler Master's approach to RGB from the offset really. Not only do you get the really high quality fans included, they actually come with 2 cables. A universal fan header cable that can plug straight into your motherboard and allow you to control all your fans as you normally would through Windows software or the motherboard BIOS, but you also get a separate universal RGB header. In this case, with it being addressable RGB, it is of the 3-pin variety, and you can either use Cooler Master's inbuilt case controller, which repurposes what was once the reset button to cycle through the modes. A side note here, the power button is actually RGB, which is crazy. Or you can use the included universal splitter to plug it up to an Asus, ASRock or MSI motherboard, and a GB adapter is nicely included. Couple of things to touch upon there. I really like it when case manufacturers include an RGB controller with chassis with RGB functionality. I think it's frankly misleading and isn't overly great from a consumer-centric point of view to not give you the means to control your RGB. So big kudos to Cooler Master on this one. The universal standard is also a much better approach in my opinion, and it allows you to get wide system spanning effects. The Asus Aurosync or MSI Mystic Lite software suites are fantastic and allow you to sync up these fans with RGB strips, your graphics card, even memory modules from the likes of ADATA that I've reviewed in the past. Finally, Cooler Master also include a 120mm airflow optimized fan in the rear. It's a cheaper fan, it's not RGB, but it's really nice to see and helps to give some superb airflow in this chassis. Now, ultimately, with it being a glass panel at the front, it isn't going to be quite as good on the airflow side of things as a mesh panel, for example, but that should not be a complaint. I understand that there was the big airflow fiasco with Cooler Masters and others in recent years, and I understand the importance of good airflow, but that doesn't mean we have to have mesh cases every 20 seconds, and I really like how this thing looks. Not to mention the intakes on either side are actually pretty thick, so whilst there is going to be a bit more resistance for your fans, they are going to get fresh air and your system is not going to thermal throttle. Other notable pros and positives of this chassis include the tempered glass side panel arrangement. With captive thumb screws on both the side panels and only 2 screws that have to be screwed in, it's a really nice touch. Further to that point, the rear panel actually has a pattern on it, which helps to hide cables in hot spot areas, and the panels feel thick, pretty heavy, nice and strong, nice and solid, and also have a thin, moderate black border around the edges to help sort of tidy up your system's aesthetic and also relieve the risk of fingerprints. Finally, on the rear, you also get the signature Cooler Master cable guard that was first featured in my Cooler Master H500P review, which you can find up here in the card section now. It can be a little bit tight and a little bit fiddly to get on, but it does go on if you manage your cables properly and helps to tidy up the rear look of your system. With all the positives aside, there are of course a few downsides, negatives, quirks to bear in mind with this chassis. First and foremost, this is minor but a silly mistake. The power supply dust filter, is really thin. It falls out way too easily and just is a bit crap. That should have been better. Second of all, clearance for power supply airflow underneath the case is very limited. A thick carpet or rug may cause issues for your power supply, though this does have its advantages and there is a solution. First, it means the case can actually be smaller in its footprint. I'm fed up of expensive cases just being massive, and they don't have to be. You can have a feature-rich case that looks fantastic and is built of premium materials, but isn't huge, but you do get actually ventilation on the top of the power supply shield. So a fan up sort of fanning case orientation, is possible, which does help to get around this issue. Finally, the last thing that I was a bit dodgy on is actually the clearance at the rear of the case. It does just feel a tiny bit tight, feels like it could be a bit bigger, especially with an RGB controller, for example, installed. Though I'm sure with a bit of perseverance, with a bit of dedication, bit of commitment, you'll get that side panel on with a tidy aesthetic look, no problem whatsoever. With that being said though, I think that just about wraps it up. I really like this case. I think it's one of my favourite cases this year, and I really do mean that. And I mean that because I'm just fed up of having cases that are either small form factor or huge. You can have a standard ATX mid-tower case built of premium materials that isn't absolutely colossal and doesn't weigh a ton, though this thing is a little bit heavy. With that being said, if you enjoyed today's video, smash that like button, get subscribed. I will link the case in the description below if you'd like to pick it up. Should I do a build in this case? If so, what parts should I use? 2080. And with that being said, we'll see you in the next GeekaWhat video.